Welcome to the Compact Murder podcast from compactmurder.com, the show where we explore murders, murderers, serial killers and assassinations. This is episode 48, The Murder of Mary Phagan. In the spring of 1913, Atlanta was abuzz with excitement. The South was modernizing, factories were thriving, and the promise of a new industrial age seemed just around the corner. But in the middle of that optimism came a crime that would shock Georgia, dominate national headlines, and leave a lasting scar on American history. The murder of 13-year-old Mary Phagan was not only a tragedy for a young girl and her family, but it became the center of one of the most infamous trials in the United States. At its core was the question of who killed Mary, but surrounding it were explosive issues of class, race, religion, and justice in the Deep South. Mary Phagan was born in 1899 in Florence, Alabama. However, her family moved frequently throughout the South before settling in Marietta, Georgia. Her father died when she was an infant, and Mary's mother worked hard to support her children. By 1913, Mary was working at the National Pencil Company factory in downtown Atlanta, where she earned 10 cents an hour inserting erasers into pencils. It was monotonous work, but it helped the family survive. Mary was a typical young teenager, fond of picnics, fairs, and spending time with friends. Her life was ordinary, which made what happened to her all the more shocking. On Saturday, April the 26th, 1913, Atlanta was celebrating Confederate Memorial Day. Most businesses closed early for the holiday, but the National Pencil Company factory remained open. Mary went to the factory at around noon to collect her wages of $1.20 from the superintendent, Leo Frank. Mary never came home. Later that night, her body was discovered in the basement of the factory by the night watchman, Newt Lee. She had been strangled with a cord and showed signs of a brutal struggle. Bloodstains and cinders covered her face and her dress was torn. Near the body, investigators found 2 handwritten notes, apparently from the killer, written in broken English. One note suggested the night watchman was responsible. The murder immediately gripped the city. The brutal killing of a young white girl in an industrial workplace raised alarm, and the hunt for her killer began at once. The police quickly focused on several suspects, including Newt Lee, the night watchman who had discovered the body. But suspicion soon shifted toward Leo Frank, the factory superintendent. Frank was a Cornell-educated Jewish businessman from Brooklyn who had been running the factory for several years. Detectives noted that Mary had last been seen entering his office to collect her pay. They also found the circumstances suspicious. Frank had called Newt Lee back to work earlier than usual that day and seemed unusually nervous when questioned. Another key figure in the case was Jim Conley, an African-American janitor at the factory. Conley was arrested after being caught washing a shirt stained with blood. During interrogation, he changed his story several times, eventually claiming that Frank had asked him to help cover up the crime. Conley said he had helped move Mary's body to the basement and had written the notes at Frank's direction. With Conley's testimony, police and prosecutors built their case against Frank. Despite inconsistencies in Conley's story and questions about his credibility, the authorities saw him as the key witness who could convict Frank. The trial began in July 1913 and quickly became a media sensation. Courtrooms were packed, newspapers printed lurid headlines, and crowds gathered outside, chanting for justice. The prosecution argued that Leo Frank had lured Mary into his office, assaulted her, and killed her when she resisted. They relied heavily on Jim Conley's testimony, portraying Frank as the mastermind behind the crime, and Conley as an unwilling accomplice. The defense countered that Conley himself was the murderer. They highlighted his history of lying, his inconsistent stories, and the physical evidence that implicated him. Frank, they argued, was a respectable businessman with no motive to kill Mary Phagan. But the atmosphere in Atlanta was tense. Anti-Semitic sentiment, already present in the South, became a powerful undercurrent in the trial. Frank, a northern-born Jew, was portrayed by some in the press as an outsider who exploited southern girls in his factory. The crowds outside the courtroom shouted threats, and the jury was aware of the public anger. After weeks of testimony, the jury took only a few hours to convict Leo Frank of murder. He was sentenced to death by hanging. Frank's lawyers immediately appealed the conviction, pointing out the lack of physical evidence linking him to the crime and the reliance on the testimony of Jim Conley, whose credibility was questionable at best. Appeals went all the way to the Supreme Court, but the conviction stood. The case drew national attention. Prominent figures, including journalists, lawyers, and Jewish organizations, argued that Frank had not received a fair trial. They pointed to the hostile atmosphere, the questionable testimony, and the anti-Semitic rhetoric that surrounded the proceedings. In 1915, Georgia Governor John Slayton reviewed the case. After studying the evidence, he concluded that there was too much doubt to execute Frank. On the 21st of June 1915, Slayton commuted Frank's sentence from death to life imprisonment. His decision sparked outrage. Angry mobs gathered outside the governor's mansion, and Slayton had to call in the National Guard to protect himself. His political career was effectively destroyed, but he maintained that he had acted on principle. The commutation did not end the matter. In August 1915, a group of about 25 men, calling themselves the Knights of Mary Phagan, took matters into their own hands. They kidnapped Frank from the state prison in Milledgeville, drove him to Marietta, and lynched him from an oak tree near Mary's home. Photographs of the lynching were sold as souvenirs, and many in the local community treated the act as justice delivered where the courts had failed. The lynching shocked the nation and became one of the most infamous acts of vigilante violence in American history. The murder of Mary Phagan and the trial of Leo Frank left a complicated legacy. On one level, it was a personal tragedy. A young girl brutally murdered, her family left to grieve, and a man executed by mob violence. On another level, it highlighted deep issues in American society. The case exposed the power of prejudice, the fragility of due process under public pressure, and the dangers of mob justice. For the Jewish community, the trial and lynching of Leo Frank became a rallying point against anti-Semitism in the United States. In response, the Anti-Defamation League was founded in 1913, dedicated to fighting prejudice and promoting justice. The case also influenced race relations. The reliance on Jim Conley's testimony, an African-American man accusing a white factory manager, was unusual in the Jim Crow South, where black voices were often dismissed in court. Yet Conley's role in the trial did not change the wider racial inequalities of the time. In 1986, the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles issued a posthumous pardon to Leo Frank, not declaring him innocent, but acknowledging the state's failure to protect him from lynching. The murder of Mary Phagan endures in public memory because it is more than just a crime story. It sits at the intersection of true crime, politics, race, and religion in early 20th century America. It shows how fear, prejudice, and public anger can overwhelm justice. For Mary Phagan, the case serves as a poignant reminder of a young life cut short on what should have been an ordinary day. For Leo Frank, it is a story of a man caught in a storm of hatred and hysteria. For America, it remains one of the starkest examples of how justice can be derailed by forces outside the courtroom. Even now, more than a century later, the debate continues. Was Leo Frank guilty or innocent? Was Jim Conley the real killer? Or was the truth lost forever in the frenzy of the trial and its aftermath? I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Compact Murder Podcast from compacthistories.com. If you did, why not leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts? And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you would like to support us more directly, please consider buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/murdercoffee to see how. Also, please check out our other Compact podcasts. You will find them all at compacthistories.com. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.